Do you think sex is dirty? I think it is. Actually, it's true. I do think that for most people, the experience of sex is dirty. That's not at all, however, to say that I think that the experience of sex is dirt. Those are completely different things. A window can be dirty, but that doesn't mean that the window is itself dirt. Dirty means that there's something covering, something from the outside that's covering the transparency that would be there otherwise. So for most people, there is craving and unconsciousness entering into their sexual experiences. And that could be called a kind of dirt. The term in Buddhism, in Pali, would be agantuka kilesa. Agantuka means secondary or coming from the outside. Kilesa means impurity, not in the sense of you're impure because you're a bad boy kind of impurity, but rather more impurity in the sense of mining engineering. In other words, if you have an ore, with that ore can be mixed something other than that ore. You can have gold, and there are impurities in the gold. A refining process removes the impurity. So in that metallurgical sense, kilesa is an impurity. Consciousness is gold, and there's this other stuff, craving, aversion, and unconsciousness, that's mixed in with it and causes our problems. So yes, there is this craving, aversion, and unconsciousness mixed into the sexual experience that covers over what otherwise would be a transparent window to transcendence. So yes, from that perspective, we could say that for most people, sex is dirty. Of the three, craving, aversion, and unconsciousness, in the sexual domain, because it's primarily pleasure involved, it's the unconsciousness and the craving or grasping around the pleasure that cause the obscuring of the clear window. If we develop our mindfulness skills to the point where we have enough momentum of concentration, clarity, and equanimity, that momentum will automatically carry into the lovemaking situation, in which case it will be less dirty and eventually not dirty at all. All the dirt will be cleaned away from the window, and we'll be able to clearly understand the jewel that has been sort of hidden in the petals of this beautiful lotus. Nothing wrong with the petals of the beautiful lotus, but when you peel them back, you'll discover something extraordinary, the jewel in the lotus. So what is the jewel in the lotus? Well, it's the liberation potential in the act of making love. And what is that liberation potential? It's at two levels. The first level is that the act of lovemaking can potentially become a pleasure meditation. Now, pleasure meditation is a tricky deal. Pleasure meditation is meditation. It's not the same as pleasure indulgence. What makes the experience of pleasure a meditative endeavor? Well, as you're experiencing the pleasure, you taste the effect of your equanimity with that pleasure, And that effect is that the pleasure is providing you with greater and greater fulfillment, seemingly paradoxically, as you become more and more detached from the pleasure as it's occurring. You don't tighten around its arising out of fear of being overwhelmed. You don't hold on to its passing out of fear of loss of something. When you stop tightening around pleasure in general out of fear of overwhelm and stop holding on to trying to prevent its passing out of fear of loss, when you stop doing that, then the pleasure starts to deliver for you greater and greater satisfaction. Clearly, this becomes most challenging when the pleasure is of the most intense type that the human nervous system can produce, which typically happens in the lovemaking situation. There, the fear of overwhelm is obviously great, so there tends to be a tightening around the arising of the pleasure. Also, the sense of loss when a wave of pleasure passes can be great, so there's a tightening around the passing of the pleasure. If you can learn to experience the pleasure without the tightening on its arising or its passing, then you start to experience something beyond pleasure. You experience fulfillment. At the most extreme level of that phenomenon, the pleasure hovers right at the boundary between existence and non-existence. It's so much a wave, you're so open to it, that it's in a sense not there, but it also is there. The Tibetan term for that is the oneness of bliss and void. So one level at which the lovemaking, the jewel in the lotus, reveals itself is in this complete experience of pleasure, which gives immense fulfillment, transforms consciousness, but is paradoxical because it's both rich and empty at the same time. However, at an even deeper level, the jewel in the lotus, the spiritual potential in the act of making love, arises from the fact that the feel, image, talk self has a natural tendency to dissolve into flow and even to vanish, to disappear, due to the expansion of the pleasant touch and the sight and sound of your partner. And that is a direct window into an experience that actually happens naturally all the time in daily life, just not quite so intensely. And if you can look through that window, see the dissolving of your feel, image, talk self into flow, and then the disappearance of that flow into nothing whatsoeverness, you may be able, in fact you will, eventually be able to remember what that experience is and replicate it with the touch, sight, sound of everything in the world. That is not to say that all your daily experiences become eroticized. All your daily experiences become spiritualized. And the act of love was your synagogue, your church, where that sermon was first delivered.